Hello, everyone. Our commercial's still new. I kind of love it.
I say it's high
I
energy
am,
commercial. I like that.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. We're high energy over here at Civility Partners. So I'm going to introduce my two guests today. Welcome to all my viewers. We have the one and only Dr. Ross Blankenship, who does some really cool things. His company is Tuesday Advisors, author of books Everyday Leadership, a guide to developing your mindset as a leader, and Assessing CEOs and Senior Leaders, co-author of another upcoming book, How Tension, Emotion, and Change Reveal Better Leaders. That's due out, or it is out, I guess. Is it out already as of August
Coming out in
1st?
September.
Oh,
September 22.
Yep.
okay. So it got pushed back a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, Ross, go ahead and introduce yourself a little more, and then we'll let Dr. Maggie introduce.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's fun to be here. So I'm Ross. Like you said, I have a consulting coaching firm called Tuesday Advisors where I do executive leadership coaching, succession planning, that kind of stuff, and then spend the rest of my time parenting little kids and trying to write books. As you said, our big news is we have Friction coming out in September, which we're kind of in the process of starting to spread the word and talk more about. And it's been a really fun process. We're excited for it to get out into the world.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you today. And then, of course, we have Dr. Maggie Sass over there at Talent Smart EQ here in San Diego. I grew up with Talent Smart, and all these years I've been doing consulting, and you're the Executive Vice President of Applied Research, and you're all about assessment data, directing the evolution of the EQ assessment, which, been around for a long time.
Yep.
So Maggie, introduce yourself a little bit further.
Yeah. So thanks so much for having us. So my background, I'm an organizational psychologist and executive coach. I spent the first 10, 11 years of my career at the Center for Creative Leadership, sort of getting versed in all things leadership development, and then made the jump to Talent Smart in 2021. So I head up product and research, and yeah, it's been a really fun sort of year plus project working with Ross on this book. But I think we're trying to build on the great research and literature on emotional intelligence and leadership, and really help people sort of meet this moment right now where we've got a lot of change, a lot of disruption, and everyone's just trying to figure out how to do it.
I think we could all use a little more emotional intelligence in our lives these days. Now, I'm going to just go off topic a little bit because, Ross, you write on Substack too, and I was really interested with your blog there, Theory of Change, and you talk about people making sense of their lives through work, identity, and transition. Tell us a little bit more about what's all that, and how do we get to where we can read Theory of Change?
I'm on Substack at Ross Blankenship, right? Theory of Change is what it's called now. It started as a project. I was teaching a course at the University of Virginia that I tried to call, what did I try to call it? I think I tried to call it, What Should I Do With My Life? And that got rejected by the provost. So we called it Navigating Complex Decisions in Work and Career, which is a lot less fun to say. Yeah. And every time I told somebody I was doing that, they would say, that sounds so interesting. I wish I could take that class. And I was like, maybe I should write about this a little bit. And so I started writing about career decisions and the psychology of career change. And it kind of morphed into conversations that I was having with coaching clients about identity and how that impacts their ability to show up as a founder, as a leader. And I think I started to think about what I was doing more as like trying to understand someone's theory of change. Like, what is it that I do that could change something in my life? How do I believe that would actually happen? And then I started to see it and think about it more critically, like in the things I was reading and the movies and shows I was watching, where it's like, oh, it's interesting. Like the theory of change in this movie is that if you can confront, the bad things that you did in your past and sort of make peace with them, then you can evolve from there. Or, so it became a place of collecting ideas and just kind of trying to test a different way of writing. Maggie and I went to grad school together where we got our PhDs in psychology.
Okay.
And they absolutely hammer interesting writing out of your system. And so writing online and like a blog Substack type mode is an interesting challenge for me on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, depending on how frequently I get to it.
I'm with you. My first book is called Back Off. I wrote it right after graduate school. I had all the workplace bullying research I'd done sort of rolling around in my head, and it was more for me to just kind of understand
it out.
I knew, but a lot of people told me that, and of course it was self-published. A lot of people said, you really jump back and forth between very casual kind of blog and then, and according to the research,
very academic writing.
It's a hard thing to unlearn.
Yes, it is. It is. Well, that's awesome. I think sometimes we get thrown into change as well, and you just gotta sink or swim, which is some of what we're talking about today, is kind of resilience and all of that. So in the book, you talk about 3 types of friction: internal, interpersonal, and systemic. Let's talk about that. What are those 3 things, and how do we know which one we're in? Are they all functioning together?
Yeah. So I can jump in, and then Ross, I'd love to hear what you would add too. But I think generally this project started because Ross and I kept seeing the word friction, and in conversations we were having with leaders, when we would ask them about their very worst days at work, we were hearing descriptions of friction, or people were actually using that word. And if you look at the way that word is used in context in a lot of writing, it's about frictionlessness. Like in some ways, it feels like reducing friction is sort of the primary aim of our modern world.
Yeah.
Because we want, fewer lines, fewer forms, fewer clicks, fewer steps between things. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I was on a plane, and 2 rows up, there was a guy who was on a live Zoom call at 30,000 feet. So, it used to be that you had to travel to meet a client. Now you just need a Wi-Fi signal, which you could have in the middle of the air.
Because the Wi-Fi's not that great in there.
It's not that great. And I think he was making do, but I was shocked. But, I think that just shows us how far we've come, and how much friction we have reduced in a lot of different sort of areas. The problem is that we've gotten so used to doing that, to reducing it, that I think we also struggle to figure out what friction actually is. So we organize it into these 3 sort of broad buckets. Internal friction lives inside a single person. So in me, it might be hesitation or self-doubt. In you, it could look like, perfectionism, or the fear of being wrong in public. I think it's easy to spot because the obstacle doesn't really move, even if you remove external barriers, right? So you could give someone more resources or more authority. You could send them to a leadership development course, or you could provide more clarity about their role, and they are still struggling, or they're still stalling. And so I think that the sign that it is internal and not situational is that you've removed everything else and it's still there.
Okay.
Interpersonal friction shows up between 2 or more people. So, the very typical examples of that are conflict, disagreements or trust gaps, competing incentives between people that sit in different functions. And usually the tell here is that it is relationship specific. So it appears with one person or a team, but not another, who are doing the same type of work. And then the third type, systemic, is really baked into structure. So, workflow, org chart, the incentive design, and that is systemic when it is person agnostic, right? So we see this a lot when in organizations, you've got all new hires that are struggling with the same handoff, regardless of which function they're in or who their boss is, because that's really baked in. The system is the variable, not the individual. So I would say diagnostically, what we talk with leaders about is, you can ask questions in sequence. Does this follow the person? Does it follow the relationship? Or does it follow the role? And I think that's really helpful.
Ross, anything you want to add to that?
We've been talking about this model a lot over the past few months. And one of the things that we ask in audiences is, what's the primary source of friction in your life or your work right now? Is it individual, interpersonal, or systemic, or all 3? And the most common response is all three.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges that we kind of offer to people is trying to identify sources of friction, trying to think about like how would you apply that word to what's going on in your life, and then trying to parse it, because parsing it becomes a little bit of the challenge. Like where is it burning the brightest is maybe the easiest way to think about it, but very frequently they feed each other. I even see a comment right now, most people don't like confrontation of any kind. That is an individual source of friction that has like an interpersonal effect. And if you do that across 2 or 3 different relationships, all of a sudden it's going to become a systemic part of the culture. So you can see how they kind of they interact with each other.
Yeah, or if you're in a workplace where confrontation's clearly frowned upon, or going against the status quo, I feel like every time if you're a construction worker, everywhere you go, you see a nail and a hammer kind of a thing. But we talk about culture at Civility Partners through the OIL model, which is the organizational systems, interpersonal relationships, and internal, the people, and then the leadership team. And I think a lot of times, and so obviously there's friction if we're in there helping them fix their broken culture. But I'm glad that you talk about that. I think a lot of times, even some positive development or personal development or positive thinking books or culture books, a lot of times they don't necessarily focus on the system. They focus on the people without really recognizing how important the system is, or even the family system that could be part of the system too. So I love that you're thinking about it that way. And it makes sense that it would all be working together.
It's all looped and stacking.
Yes. What, so there's, I know there's kind of productive friction, and I think about a simple metaphor of like a cricket rubbing its legs together. That's friction, but it makes a noise that, crickets need to be making. So that's kind of productive friction versus destructive friction. So can we talk a little bit about that and what's the difference? And let's start there.
Yeah, we have a nice rhyming framework for that, which is friction is productive and destructive, but it's always instructive. The idea, most of the writing about friction out there talks about like reducing friction, making workflows more simple, taking red tape away. The leader's job is to make it easier for other people to do their work. And to Maggie's point earlier, so much of the way that we engage with that problem, especially in work, is to reduce it or ignore it or try to make it go away. Our argument in this book is that that is still true, but there are also sources of friction that create a lot of value, whether that's you're over-engineering, human interaction away, and you're damaging relationships or opportunities for relationship building. Or if you're the classic example right now is offloading too much cognitive work, like too much cognitive load onto an AI system. So you're not actually thinking anymore. And so you lose the development that happens in the process of trying to clarify a thought into a well-written paragraph. You can push a button and a AI chatbot will produce text, but that doesn't mean that you thought it. And the process of getting there is where the development happens. That's what enhances your ability to talk about the idea later, to recall the idea, to have some sense of ownership over it. So that's a very prevalent example at the moment of a place where we see friction being reduced, but to a point where it's creating damage on the backside rather than a productive output.
Yeah, I also have littles, and I'm very concerned about what it's going to be for them. A master's degree is all about being a master in a topic, or PhD, and
What does that look like? What does that mean now?
I know. I hear my daughter. She'll be like, Alexa, what's 12 times 25? I'm like, no. So there's productive friction, and so how do we be aware when we're sort of eliminating that productive friction to the extent that we aren't learning from it or we aren't getting the life lessons? Like how because I think inherently we all know that with AI, and of course it's out there, we're talking about it, but there's probably a lot of other examples where friction's productive, but we maybe don't think about it that way in the moment. It feels destructive, and then you look back and realize it's productive. So how do you sort of discern this is going to be good for me, even though it's hard?
Yeah, I think our rhyming mechanism is really useful. I think the other way to think about friction, or the way that we try to think about it, is like a stoplight, a set of stoplights, because I think the average person thinks of it as a red light. Like, friction is a problem, friction is bad. I think we think of it as a signal, right? And so it's how you respond to it that determines if it's, what it is, right? Is it informative? Is it instructive? Is it a problem that needs to be eliminated? And I think too, the second half of the book is all experiments to try things to see if it changes the relationship with friction and subsequently the outcomes. Our sort of frame is, we don't know you, we don't know your context, we don't know your culture, organizational or otherwise. And so we don't know what's going to work. And a lot of times leaders just get into autopilot and they're not trying new things. They've just resigned themselves to, this is how it is. These things are terrible and these things are livable, and I'm just going to make my way through this mess. And we're arguing that maybe there's a better way, that if you can confront some of the things that feel like a mess, you might actually find something really useful. And then some of the things are a mess and you've got to clean those things up. But okay, so for me, when I think about this, I think the question of whether it's the right call comes down to what the friction is protecting against. So good friction targets sort of like a known failure mode, a place where maybe speed has historically produced bad outcomes, like, rash firing or groupthink or impulsive spending or decisions made in anger or some other emotion, right? So we're not trying to add back friction generically. You're trying to add it where you've got some data that speed might be problematic. And then bad friction, I think, in contrast, is friction that exists because it always has. Like, we've always done it that way, right? Because it's maybe protecting a person rather than an outcome. So if a sign-off step exists just so that a manager feels more informed or they have more information, or a review process was inherited from a company, that's just drag, right? That's just friction that exists there because it always has. I think if you can name a specific bad outcome that friction is preventing against, and you can point to evidence that that outcome has actually happened, then that's how you know that you can separate it into good and bad.
Okay. And someone made a comment, if it's uncomfortable, but you're not afraid to ask questions or afraid to move, that's good.
Yeah.
I still feel like, because you're essentially saying you have to have the ability to pause and think it through and go, has this created bad outcomes for us or not? And because we're all about moving quickly and having Zoom calls on airplanes, apparently, what are some sort of mental tricks or team tricks that we can be thinking of to help us kind of stop and evaluate, is this good friction or bad friction, or what do we need to do here?
One of my favorite experiments that we talk about in the book, just to maybe pull back a little bit too, a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about friction is, like you mentioned in the subtitle, it's tension, emotion, and change. It's that feeling that tension, emotion, and change create. And one of the things we talk about is that leadership is an emotional task, that there is emotion that's involved in it because it's a social phenomenon. So if you're dealing with other people, emotion is involved. And a lot of times it is the emotional substrate that we're trying to eliminate or skirt past, rather than engaging in what the emotion might be able to tell us. That's like the instructive piece of it, is if you're feeling angry, that is telling you something about what's going on, and probably like about how you're feeling about whether your boundaries or your authority are being impinged upon, or you're not getting what you think you need. There's an argument that we've heard in response to this that's like, are you just saying that leaders need to be more emotional? Which that's laden with all sorts of cultural implications. And what we are saying is, no, what we're saying is leaders need to be aware of the fact, really everybody, that emotion is always present in what we're doing, how we're thinking, how we're deciding, how we're communicating. And to the extent that we ignore it, we're just ignoring something that is shaping how we're showing up and how we're responding. If emotion is like an urge to act in a certain way, if anger is an urge to set a boundary, or sadness is an urge to withdraw, you're having that urge, whether to call it anger or sadness or not.
Yeah.
Your point about how do you tune into it, that's the coin of the realm here. There's mindfulness meditation, there's breathing exercises. Something that has helped me, which is really silly, is
the best.
It's those simple things, right, that reduce friction.
Right.
There's this model of emotional, the emotion map. It's Mark Brackett's model. I can't remember the specific term for it, but the mood meter. Thank you. He frames it as high energy, low energy, and then the valence is the cross. And so you wind up with a 4-quadrant model. And I can pretty easily identify, like, I'm in the high energy bad realm, which is like rage, anger, frustration. A lot of times in my work, I hear men talk about being frustrated. That's a word that we have a lot of access to. And if you poke enough, there's rage down in there somewhere. And that's a more instructive emotion. When I feel like high energy bad, which happens a lot with raising small kids, we've got a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 4-month-old. So we were both sleep deprived and
stimulated.
Overstimulated. Thank you. Is to just change like the shape of my body. So I tell Maggie this, I've done this in front of audiences. I will lay down on the ground and put my legs up in the air, which I've learned is the dead bug pose from yoga. But the thinking there is, if you just change how the blood is flowing through your body, it will impact how you feel. It may take a minute. And I have found very challenging to stay frustrated when your legs are in the air and you look really silly in front of your kids.
Yeah,
that's right.
The other thing that I would add to this, so as part of this book, we did some research, and one of the things that came out of that was the emotion that people think is the most inappropriate at work is anger. And I think there's a sort of a misappropriation of the difference between saying and displaying emotions, because I would agree with you that throwing shoes, throwing a temper tantrum is a problem and very quickly becomes an HR issue. But having the feeling of anger, to Ross's point, is instructive about something that's happening underneath the surface. And it might be in relation to the relationship, it might be relative to something that's happening outside of work, right? But I think there's a comment here in the chat about how trust helps create safety. And I think trust and safety are built in these small ways, right? And leaders learning to be appropriately vulnerable and authentic about, here's what's happening for me. I think I worked with a leader once who was incredibly uncomfortable with emotions. And I said, that's totally fine. We're going to start really slow, but I do want you at some point to start to have conversations with your team, either one-on-ones or in group settings, about things that you're feeling. He's like, this is ridiculous. Why would we ever do this? Like, why would I ever do this? And I said, I don't care what you think about why we would do it. Let's just try it and get more data. That's the point of experimenting, right? Let's try it and get more data points. And what he found, which I think was really surprising to him, was it was maybe helpful to him in the moment to share, like, here's a feeling that I'm having about a specific thing. But what was more important was what it created in everybody else, right? It creates permission, it models, but it also says, okay, this person cares enough about being human to tell me this thing about their humanness. They must care about my humanness. Right. And I think I think we are moving so quickly at 30,000 feet on Zoom meetings that we forget that there are these very small behaviors that, when replicated over time, are what leadership is, right? When Ross was talking about like leadership is emotional, I think, sure, it's operational. Yes, it's strategic, but it's also emotional, because without emotions, choices don't have weight, right? You can't point to what matters. And that's a very human thing.
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts on what you said. One is, so, I specialize in leadership coaching specifically for leaders accused of bullying.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's on the heels of a hostile work environment complaint. And I find those leaders also swear they don't love emotions. They kind of don't care that, people find them tough to work with. And side note, it turns out that people like that just have no idea about the impact they're having. And once I help them see that impact, they're more than happy and like, help me. I don't want to be like this. But it's interesting and kind of ironic. And one of my favorite parts of coaching these individuals is, so I start off by interviewing 15 people because we need data. I don't know how you're perceived. All I know is what I heard from HR, right? And you clearly don't. And often it's all emotional, right? So one theme is they have emotional outbursts. Another theme is they're have disdain for people. They push them out, and so their whole set of feedback, often about 20 pages, is all about how emotional they are. And when I'm talking to them, they're telling me, I don't really care about emotions. Emotions need to be left at the door. And it's such an interesting point to say, well, let's look at your feedback. It would appear that you are very emotional. And that's always an aha moment for them. So one other thing I was thinking is, you said anger tends to be the least accepted emotion. I'm not sure I agree with that, because what I think, and this is sort of a social commentary, I think crying is the worst emotion. And then I think about masculine versus feminine emotions, that anger is an aggressive kind of masculine emotion that we tolerate much more than crying. If someone cries, that's the feminine emotion. And then it's like, oh, you cry. What's wrong with you? I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think it's really interesting because, and we dug into the data and looked at it, by different demographics. I think that was a split population between leaders and non-leaders. And I would agree with you. I think especially, and this is, likely an overgeneralization, but I would say anger is more acceptable because it's more masculine, and we don't really categorize it as emotion in the same way that maybe we categorize other emotions like shame, or worry, or something else that I think feels more reflective. I think anger has like action and forward momentum in it. I do think, though, that people are calling out sort of the outcome of anger, right? So outbursts and yelling and throwing things, like those are the things that tend to end somebody in your office. With those things. Those things tend to end those people in your office.
Stop doing that.
It's interesting though. I think a couple things. Anger occurs to me as like a very capitalistic emotion, because it is like action oriented and it's like a drive and take kind of thing. But even like crying, call it sadness, and anger are both kind of above the waterline emotions that you see at work, and some might be more or less accepted. The one that I see like flat ignored the most is like bereavement or grief. Not in the context of like an actual loss of a family member or team member, or even broad social like trauma that happens. Even that gets brought in. But Harry Levinson has this quote that I love, that is, all change creates loss and all loss must be mourned. And there is an amount of change that happens in organizations at an increasing rate now that is not at all addressed as something that needs to be considered or mourned. And even that language of like mourning around like a changing position or a changing team, or moving to a different location, like that creates all these weird feelings that we don't ever address. And the way that we address them at work is usually training, or go talk to HR, go to an EAP. And like, if you think about how you manage something like grief in a family, it's like ritual and connection. Right. And there are these things that we really don't bring into the workplace.
Yeah.
But they're shaping what's happening. I love what you said, leaders saying, I don't care about emotions. They need to be left at the door. That's like saying, I don't care about gravity. It needs to be left at the door. It's like, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's going to be impacting everything you do all day long, every day of your whole life.
We're people and emotions drive everything we do. Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's more of like, I don't like emotional people. They're just being emotional or too sensitive. And I'm like, well, you're sensitive. If you have an outburst,
you're having a reaction.
You're being sensitive.
Yeah.
You see that, right? So I love coaching my bullies. They're like little flowers that need, a little hand holding and pointed in the right direction, and then they're good.
Well, and the other interesting data point that came out of that research that we did found that it's 74% of people were raised in homes where emotions were ignored, dismissed, told, were bad, or problematic, viewed as a weakness. So the majority of people who are working inside organizations right now didn't get a handbook on how to manage this thing that is very important, that is this substrate that sits underneath all things that you're doing at work. Yeah. And if you don't have that, and you didn't get it at school, and then you went to an organization that told you to park them at the door, then you're set up for failure in this capacity, right? You're learning based on the models that you see ahead of you. And a lot of times those people had the same upbringings.
Yeah. I did a webinar on Gen Z recently, and I'm like, this is all your fault, all of you older people, because now the pendulum swung the other way, and they're not going to tolerate bad behavior. And I think, Ross, our kids, they're growing up in a time where we talk about bullying at school. In fact, I did a little bullying talk in my daughter's classroom when she was in 5th grade, and the teacher afterward was kind of like, we've already talked about all of that. Kind of like, you didn't say anything new. And I was like, oh, okay. We didn't have that when I was a kid.
That's great, though.
And my son's having a hard time regulating his emotions at school, and they're doing really great. I think back in our day, they would have said, he's got a learning disability, stick him in resource,
or here's a
but they're just really working with him. And I continue to tell the school, I'm just really thrilled that that's how we're looking at emotions. I think, the key here is that people have to recognize that emotions are telling you something. Just like if your stomach growls, or you get a cramp, your body's telling you something. And if I tell my kids this all the time, if they're bored, I'm like, it sounds like your body's telling you to get up and find something to do, and either use your mind or your body or both. I'm not here.
I needed that last night. I'm stealing that from you directly.
Okay. Make sure you cite me to your 7-year-old, I'm sure.
The other day we had the chance I had the chance to teach my girls how to water ski.
Oh, yay.
And in between her turn, my oldest daughter was like, I'm bored. Can I play on your phone? And I was like, are you kidding me? We're on a boat with your cousins, like ski. Like, no.
Yeah, they say
that's such a quick lever of like, I'm not doing the thing anymore. I need something else to do. It's like, just sit, just enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
But that's an example of adding friction, like adding friction.
Yes, totally.
That is a way that this generation is going to have to learn that, because their attention has been on screens. Like, we have created this problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that segue, because I was just going to ask, how can leaders introduce deliberate friction? So that's a great example with the kiddos. So a good leader kind of says, let's pause, let's look at the data. We're being appropriately vulnerable with each other about how we're feeling. And then they have to sort of craft, probably in collaboration with their team, where do we need to introduce some friction here, because we've moved too fast.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Yeah. One of the experiments that we have is called Borrow Your Brain Back. And this was based on, there's a teacher who takes a group of students to France, and they turn their phones in for 4 weeks, which sounds wild, right?
I don't think the parent, I'm like, I don't think I could do that.
Right. But all of these students like willingly handed in, because they explain their experience on their phones, even though they're still on them, as brain rotting.
Yeah.
And so one really sort of easy thing to do. And the experiments are sort of time boxed on purpose because, you know, I think sometimes goal setting is like, I'm going to be a more, you know, friction purposeful leader for the next year. And I think that can become a problem in and of itself. So, you know, these are intended to do, you know, for a week or 2 weeks to gather some data and see what happens. But, you know, turn your phone off or put your phone in a different room and work for half a day and see how that goes. I saw a stat a couple of years ago that across generations, 1 minute out of every 3 was spent on Facebook, the Facebook app, right? And so the amount of attention suckage that happens on technology is pretty wild. So I think that's one. Another easy thing that you can do, which when I think about this in graduate school, this makes me laugh, but like you can print something and actually write with a pen, right? That's a way to introduce friction. And you know, there are a lot of there's a lot of really interesting research that shows that writing changes the brain in different ways than even writing on a stylus or typing. So I think those are some examples.
Yeah.
I think even more like the friction that comes up when you're writing by hand, in my experience, is like, I think that I think faster than this because I can type faster than I can write. And it's not really true. It's like you think as fast as you think. And it is useful, I think, that is the friction though, is like, I can't write fast enough. It's like, well, then maybe you should be going a little bit slower.
Yeah.
And encountering that part of the process of thinking through something.
Yeah, I mean, I can't do audiobooks if I'm really wanting to learn something, or I can't do the Kindle. I have to be able to write on the margins. My books are all earmarked and tagged and underlined and all the things. There's an old, I'll mention it, an oldie but goodie article called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" Have you read this? It's old, but still very relevant. And
Long time ago,
it talks about Nietzsche, how his friends commented that once he moved to a typewriter, they felt like his writing had changed, and that, you know, we kind of the beginning of the end in terms of how we search the internet. We just kind of click all over and we don't stop to read. And so even just reading is good. Yeah. What else? Give us some other good tips for leaders in terms of like what could a leader, after listening to this, they can go back to their team and say, I saw this really amazing, just like really awesome talk on friction today. What can they do when they get back to their teams? What are some good kind of next 3 steps?
My favorite is just take these 4 words with you, which is I'm experiencing some friction, and introduce that idea to a team to say, like, this is a way into talking about I'm feeling anxiety about something, or I disagree. You know, it's a way of identifying emotional dynamics without having to say, like, can I talk about emotional dynamics for a minute? Because nobody's going to do that and nobody's going to know what that means.
Yeah.
But I think as a leader or as a member on a team, you can say, I'm experiencing a little bit of friction, and it opens up the opportunity to have a conversation about these kinds of things that may not be part of a typical leadership conversation or a team conversation. It also, part of the thing that I like about this, like entree, is that it's I language. It's like, let me talk about my experience of what's going on. So it's not very accusatory. And it almost naturally invites a question. Like if somebody says to me, Maggie and I do this, we have a call on Tuesday afternoons in 2 hours every week for the last year talking about this project. And we'll say, like, we've evolved into what friction are you experiencing? Because it's always there. And it's just a way it's a way to check in, like, what's going on in life? What are you thinking about? What are you bringing into this call? What do we need to work through before we can actually get to the work that we need to do together? Because in some circumstances, the more important work for us is not the actual thing we need to accomplish. It's processing all the other stuff. That's how, you know, at a point in this project, we had a call to talk about moving from the draft that we were on to sending it to our editor. And instead of making that decision, we had a conversation about the friction we were experiencing and decided to delete the draft and start entirely over. And so if we had just kept doing the work, we would have missed the opportunity to write, I would say, a better book. potentially a genuinely good book as opposed to not one. I'll let the judgment on that be the
It
audience's.
was not a good book.
That version was
not
definitely not good, and we were absolutely barreling towards the deadline.
So what did you tell them?
What was she experiencing?
Yeah, did you tell them we need more time? We've decided to start over, and they were okay with that.
Thankfully, they were okay with that.
Yeah, they gave us some grace. But I do think that's a good example. You know, Ross and I are really close, and we are co-authors on this book, but we were both silently spiraling for at least a week individually about how much friction we were experiencing trying to read this draft and give each other feedback. And there were so many signals that this was not the book we wanted to write, that we hadn't really gotten it right. We had sort of thrown some things at the wall and we were trying to like move them around like Tetris pieces, and it just wasn't fitting. And I think we were worried, just like all leaders are, because you've got deadlines.
I was gonna say, this happens with strategy.
Yeah, this happens all the time, where you've got deadlines and you've got expectations and other people are counting on you, and external pieces that you feel like you can't shift. And I think, you know, we learned a lot from that, but I think one of the biggest things that I take from that is, you know, what assumptions are you making about what is true?
Yeah.
Because I think that was a big piece of that, but it also just gave us some helpful language for other people. I mean, what Ross is saying, like, you know, I'm experiencing some friction. This is basically a revised version of like marriage therapy, like the way that you help each other out of like conflict situations, and you repair better.
Yeah.
Because it's an I statement that you can own. But yeah, I think what I would add, you know, we talked about this idea that leadership is emotional, and I would say everyone who's listening, like, think about that deeply. Think, like, just pause and really think about what that means for yourself. And I would say, you know, take a week and just start to pay attention to what it is that you're doing. Like, if you are spiraling about something, if you find yourself in your inbox just sort of like looking at the same 20 emails, not getting anything done, there's a feeling underneath that, right? When you meet with direct reports, like, are you watching for micro expressions? Are there things that are coming up that you tend to skip because you're like, we only have 30 minutes, or because we have a thing that's due? And I think the argument is not, like Ross was saying, emotion for emotion's sake, like an argument for over sentimentality. It's that emotions are a data set. I think that's another really important thing that we explore in the book, and we are sort of systematically under-trained to use it. And so we don't think about emotions as an important data set, not the most important, not the only, but a data set that you can add to your toolkit to help you figure out how to be more effective. Like, one of the stories that Ross tells in the book is about a group of leaders talking about delegation. And I think that's a good example where we tend to sort of design interventions for delegation at the top of the pyramid, which is like, how do you move a task to a different person? How do you think about sort of
accountability,
or like workflows, or, you know, even matching skills and traceabilities, all of that, all good stuff, all important stuff. But the reality is, what sits underneath delegation a lot of times is like, how do I manage my own ego? How do I deal with the fact that I will not be the person that's coming up with the right answer? How do I manage uncertainty about somebody else doing it differently or doing it wrong? Or even worse, maybe doing it right and them getting it better. Them getting the credit. There's so much emotion that sits under the actual task of delegation. And I would argue that that's probably true of a lot of leadership tasks, that the emotional substrate that sits underneath it is so infrequently talked about, discussed, explored in any real capacity, which means that you're building skills on top of a wonky, wobbly foundation. Like you have to be able to get into that space so that you can actually put the skills to use. We've talked about this, like another thing that leaders can do, like we've talked about friction not being good or bad, but it's a signal. And so just learning to pay attention to that, emotional intelligence is how you effectively navigate through friction. And so it's the way that you use that skill set. But the other big thing, for leaders that I think is just really important is find a way to experiment more. It feels like you are always in the game and that you have no practice time, and that just cannot be true. It can't, because then you can't find ways to learn. So you've got to find pockets and design things into the flow of work the way that it's designed for yourself, that you get more curious about getting new data.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I got to say, though, I love delegating. I'm like, yes, do it. I will go home now.
Goodbye, Sass.
I always tell managers when I'm doing any sort of manager training or leadership training, like, I just want you to experience the life that I experience of freedom because I've delegated. Delegation equals freedom. What about you, Ross? What other comments do you have?
One of my favorite nudges for my coaching clients. This is going to give you a nice insight into how I think about coaching people too.
Okay.
Is helping them hold their identity in relation to their work in a different way. And this experiment introduces a lot of friction for a lot of people, which is block only 25 minutes in a day. You can do it once a week and read a novel during the workday. People blanch at that idea. I've even had someone say, if that made my salespeople more productive, I still wouldn't want them to do it while they were at work, which is a really interesting response to that.
Such an interesting reaction to that, though.
And like, if you do this, if you like put a Post-it note on the cover of your novel that says, think about friction, the layers of friction that you will encounter while doing this are deep and wide. It's like, this is not okay. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm being paid. Is this productive?
Not what work is.
This isn't work. This isn't valuable, on down the line. And it is a nice nudge into the, if you take a 25-minute break to actually recover and you come back with less time, but more energy and clarity, you will do a better job. It's a nice corollary to elite athletes and physical exercise, which is like, if you're not taking time to recover, you're not going to get better. And recovery is not the same as, doing the same lift with less weight necessarily. It might be doing nothing. And that makes people who view work as a productivity and efficiency task to optimize really uncomfortable, when the way forward may be to read a novel or to relax or to do nothing or to go for a walk without headphones.
Yeah, be bored, stare at a wall, without a screen.
I love that you said that. I joke sometimes, what are you going to do this weekend? Stare at the wall, kind of literally. Just like listen to the silence. Yeah. I really, at first I was a little shocked, Ross, but that resonates with me because, I've been doing civility partners now for 17 years. And especially back in the day, people would say, you're so ambitious. What drives you to, build this company? And my answer was guilt. I can't sit still. I can't sit on the couch. And
that is so interesting.
Yeah. Knowing I had all these emails to send or things I needed to do. And so that's how I got here. A whole lot of guilt around not being productive, which is kind of weird. I haven't thought about that in a long time because I don't feel that anymore. But anyway, that's me. The weirdo.
Like, we're in dangerous territory because I'm about to start asking questions.
I was just going to say, I just saw Ross's eyes light up with the word guilt.
Yes, you can interview me for your next book.
That's all right.
I also love too, Maggie, that you talked about how emotions are a data set. I mean, I think anybody who does surveys in the workforce, we do our survey to get the quantitative data, but we really like the interviews and the listening sessions because that's the emotions and understanding what people really need and why they feel the way they feel. And we specialize in broken cultures, and so we can't ignore the emotions. It is that the people have become damaged, and we need to really pay attention to their emotions and what they need. So I'm with you.
Can I make an observation? It's interesting to me that you have like wound up in a specialty like this, because you're like squarely in the area of the coaching world that I have heard pretty famous coaches say, I will coach people as long as they are ready to be coached.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this is you're like a test case of like moving towards friction in a productive way of like, I'm going to jump into that area, and that's going to be the place that I'm going to own. And we're going to help people over there.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me. It's almost like friction as strategy. Like if people don't want to work with those people, that's fine. I'll go work with them and I'll figure out a good way to do it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I always joke, I don't coach normal leaders. I only coach bullies, and I make them normal, and then somebody else can, take them from there.
There you go.
I started this but way back when I was in an organization where it was actually a great culture, except for one person was just an asshole. Sorry, bleep that out. And being in HR, really just saw firsthand the damage that he caused. Of course, he was emotional. He had angry outbursts, and he really micromanaged people. And the president wouldn't say anything to him about it. He just was very conflict avoidant. And I started getting my master's degree while I was working there. And my 2 classes, my first semester, were ethnography. So I'm like, okay, I got to write a paper about work because that's where I am. And the other class was called The Dark Side of Communication. And so I had to write about some sort of dark problem in human.
And a star was born.
Yeah. Awesome. And so I'm like, well, I could write about toxic leadership for both classes. That way, one set of research, 2 papers, and came across the phrase workplace bullying and became very fascinated. And it was very therapeutic. And so I joke, I have a master's degree in workplace bullying. I can tell you how to do it really well, or how to put a stop to it. Let me know which one you want.
Like a red hat hacker, yeah, or white hat.
I have one last totally unrelated question. Ross, is that a giraffe with a cape behind you?
That's a good question. No, it's not. This, because I do have a giraffe. This is a horse.
A horse. It doesn't have a cape. It looks. Oh, he's going to show it to us.
This is a horse by Bo Reinhardt, who was the co-founder of Need to Breathe, actually, and is an incredible artist.
That's
My wife
beautiful.
used to ride horses when she was growing up, and so I bought that for her and then put it in my office.
There you go. Well, it's beautiful. Doesn't it, Maggie? It looks like a giraffe.
It does. It could be a giraffe. I was going to say it's a Rorschach ink blot.
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting that's what you see.
Well, I noticed it because in my room I have a painting or something similar. It's just a little character in the middle of the black frame, and in my room it's an owl that looks like he's falling off a tree. And so I thought a giraffe with a cape is probably a better representation versus the owl hanging on for dear life. But anyway.
My dad was a psychologist, and he printed off the old Rorschachs and framed them, and they're hanging in their lake house. And we'll get cocktails when people come over, and it's like, come tell me what you see in the hall. I'm like, Dad, this is not a fair thing to do to people.
That is not ethical.
Yeah, but you're on the up and up because you got the PhD. You can psychology, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You can do a test like that.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Ross, tell us how to get a hold of you, obviously on LinkedIn. And then Maggie, you tell us how to get a hold of you. Remind us of the book title, when it's coming out, so that everybody can get access to it. And thank you so much.
Yeah. Best places to find me are LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm at Ross Blankenship, and Substack also at Ross Blankenship. And the book is Friction: How Tension, Emotion, and Change Reveal Better Leaders. And it comes out September 22nd. We're having a launch event on September 30th in Birmingham, Alabama. If you happen to be here, come on to Thank You Books. And then Maggie.
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, but also talentsmarteq.com, all things book related. And we've got a program leading through friction that leverages the research and content from the book as well.
Yeah, that's so cool that you were able to get a job at Talent Smart and be able to leverage all your knowledge and everything you know.
We have merch too. The Talent Smart website. Get you some friction merch.
All right. I'll trade you. I'll send you Civility Partners.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Thanks all for listening. Share if you thought this was a great conversation. I certainly did. I was taking some notes. So thank you to both of you again for your time, and can't wait to read the book.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much
for having us.